Physicists just created the world's first time crystal. Just last month, physicists made the best case yet for why time crystals, hypothetical structures that have movement without energy, could technically exist as physical objects. And now, 4 years after they were first proposed, scientists have managed to add a fourth dimension, the movement of time, to a crystal for the first time, giving it the ability to act as a kind of perpetual timekeeper. First proposed by Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist Frank Wilczek back in 2012, time crystals are hypothetical structures that appear to have movement even at their lowest energy state, known as a ground state. What's been puzzling physicists for decades is that strange things happen when certain objects such as crystals and magnets enter their ground state. They appear to violate a fundamental law in physics called time translation symmetry, and end up with what's referred to as asymmetrical ground states. Consider a magnet, each one has a north and a south end. It's unclear how a magnet decides which end will be north and which will be south, but the fact that it has a north and a south end means it won't look the same on both ends. It's naturally asymmetrical. Another example of a physical object with an asymmetrical ground state is a crystal. Crystals are known for their repeating structural patterns, but somehow they appear to be the same when viewed from certain directions, but not others. So like magnets, depending on where you observe a crystal in space, it will look different. For something to have an asymmetrical ground state, it has to achieve this asymmetry while standing still, no energy involved. With this in mind, Wilczek proposed that it might be possible to create an object that achieves an asymmetrical ground state not across space like ordinary crystals or magnets, but across time. As we explained last month, in very basic terms, Wilczek envisioned an object that could achieve everlasting movement while in its ground, or zero energy, state by periodically switching between states over and over again. He said it could be possible to construct such an object by putting ordinary crystals in a low-temperature superconductor, because crystals naturally align themselves at low temperatures. It seemed reasonable to assume that the atoms in such a crystal could conceivably move or rotate and then return to their natural state continually, as crystals are wont to do as they seek a lowest energy state, Bob Yurka explained for Physical.org. Now a team from the University of Maryland have tried out such an experiment, and it looks like it actually works. As MIT Technology Review reports, in theory, the process is fairly simple. You just need to create a quantum system, where you hold onto a bunch of ions in the shape of a ring, and then cool them to their lowest energy state. Then you could see if the system breaks symmetry. The laws of physics predict that the ring will stay perfectly stationary with no energy for movement, but if time symmetry were broken at this ground state, then the ring could vary, or rotate, periodically in time. Of course, it would never be possible to extract energy from this motion. That would violate the conservation of energy, says Tech Review. But the temporal symmetry breaking would manifest itself in this repeating motion in time, just as spatial symmetry breaking manifests itself as repeating patterns in space. If things were as simple as we just described, Wilczek would have built such a system back in 2012. But there's just one problem: because quantum particles tend to blink in and out of positions in space, they aren't influenced by time-dependent variables, meaning they don't evolve over time. The first step was for the University of Maryland to find a quantum system that was. They did this by chaining together a line of ytterbium ions with spins that interact with each other, and holding them in an out-of-equilibrium state. This forced the quantum ions to become localized in a specific space, and therefore influenced by time. Using a laser, the team could then start changing the spin of specific ytterbium ions, and by flipping the spin of one ion, it caused the next one to flip, and so on down the chain, until every ion was oscillating. Once the laser had been used to set the first one off, the oscillation was perpetual, and over time, the researchers noticed something strange. As Tech Review explains, these guys discovered that after allowing the system to evolve, the interactions occurred at a rate that was twice the original period. Since there is no driving force with that period, the only explanation is that the time symmetry must have been broken, thereby allowing these longer periods. In other words, they had created a time crystal. To be clear, we're not talking about perpetual motion machines here, because by definition, there is no energy in these systems. But it does demonstrate that time crystals can occur in a real, physical system, and the team says that they could help us solve the problem of quantum memory, that is, how to retain information in the future generation of quantum computers. The researchers have submitted their results to the preprint website arcs4.org, to be picked over by their physicist peers, so we'll have to wait and see if their experiment can be independently replicated. But if it can, we're only just beginning to realize the potential of the incredibly strange time crystal. With time crystals we may be able to send information back and forwards in time. Force or cause temporal displacements. Now back to Frank Wilczek. First proposed by Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist Frank Wilczek back in 2012, time crystals are hypothetical structures that appear to have movement even at their lowest energy state. This ability violates a fundamental symmetry in physics called time translation symmetry, but physicists have now demonstrated that it might actually be possible for time crystals to physically exist. If none of this makes sense to you, don't worry, we'll run you through the backstory. In 2012, Wilczek and a team of theoretical physicists at MIT suggested that it could be possible to add a fourth dimension, the movement of time, to a crystal, imbuing it with the ability to act as a kind of perpetual timekeeper, or clock. In basic terms, Wilczek envisioned an object that could achieve everlasting movement by periodically moving and then returning to its original state over and over again in its lowest energy state, known as its ground state. As the energy of the ground state is known as the zero-point energy of a system, it means movement should theoretically be impossible, but perhaps not for time crystals. As Bob Yurka explains for Physical.org, Wilczek proposed that it could be possible to construct a time crystal using a low-temperature superconductor, because crystals naturally align themselves at low temperatures. It seemed reasonable to assume that the atoms in such a crystal could conceivably move or rotate and then return to their natural state naturally, continually, as crystals are wont to do as they seek a lowest energy state, says Yurka. The idea was that a ring of ions inside the crystal could be made to move independently inside the crystal, like a mouse exploring the inside of a snake's stomach, but he couldn't figure out how to build such a thing. Within months, a separate team of physicists from Purdue University jumped in and said Wilczek's plan could work, they just needed better ion traps, which was something that would conceivably be developed within the next few years. Fast forward to now, and those predictions are looking pretty spot on. Physicists from the University of California, Santa Barbara have proposed that it's possible, in theory, to build a time crystal from a large system of trapped atoms, ions, or superconducting qubits, particles used in quantum computers to replace the bits of today's computers, just as the Purdue team had predicted 4 years ago. But they weren't looking for a method to produce a time crystal, specifically. They were more interested in trying to prove that time crystals could exist by tackling the biggest argument against them, that their existence fundamentally breaks time translation symmetry, TTS. Time translation symmetry is a version of one of the three symmetries of spacetime called translation symmetry, which states that the laws of physics are the same everywhere and at all times. It's one of the most fundamental assumptions of our current understanding of physics, but the University of California team argues that you can actually break time translation symmetry without having everything you know and love crumble around you. The crucial difference here is between explicit symmetry breaking and spontaneous symmetry breaking. One of the team, Dominic Els, told Lisa Ziga at Physical.org. If a symmetry is broken explicitly, then the laws of nature do not have the symmetry anymore. Spontaneous symmetry breaking means that the laws of nature have a symmetry, but nature chooses a state that doesn't. As Ziga explains, while spontaneously broken time translation symmetry has never been observed before, almost every other type of spontaneous symmetry breaking has been. For example, how magnets get their north and south poles, what force decided which would be north and which would be south, and how ordinary crystals look different when viewed from different angles in space. Using a simulation, the team demonstrated how spontaneously broken time translation symmetry could take place in a type of quantum system called flow-K-many-body localized driven systems. They found that a simple crystal could be turned into such a system, and was able to achieve two things that allowed it in our current understanding of physics to coexist. First, it remained far from thermal equilibrium at all times, meaning the system never heated up, despite its periodic, oscillating motions. And secondly, as the size of the system continued to grow, the time it took for a symmetry-breaking state to relapse into symmetry-respecting state increased, meaning that in an infinite system, the symmetry-respecting state can never be reached. So time translation symmetry can be broken indefinitely within the time crystal system, but this perpetually rotating object doesn't heat up, so the second law of thermodynamics remains intact, a crucial stipulation for a time crystal to exist within the laws of physics. The significance of our work is twofold. On one hand, it demonstrates that time translation symmetry is not immune to being spontaneously broken, one of the team, Bella Bauer, told Physical.org. On the other hand, it deepens our understanding that non-equilibrium systems can host many interesting states of matter that cannot exist in equilibrium systems. The next step, of course, is for someone to go ahead and build such a thing for real. And with this evidence in place, there's never been a better time to carve out a time crystal. This being said, they have and are making more. For science. For one to travel in time, one may need a simple crystal clock. But who will be the timekeeper? Stay paranoid, my friends.